Cindy, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Paul, Helene, Cooper, Todd, thank you all. We're going to move quickly to our next panel, where we're going to be exploring another key theme for our National Commission. That's really the future of innovation. How do we develop and deploy disruptive technologies at speed and scale? So I'd like to call up to the stage our next distinguished panel. First, our moderator, the Dean and the Walter J. Zabel Distinguished Professor at the Jacobs School of Engineering at the University of California, San Diego, Al Pisano. The Vice President for Research and Corporate Technology Office of Lockheed Martin, Valerie Browning. The Vice President of Research, Innovation, and Economic Impact at George Mason University, Andre Marshall. The Director of Los Alamos National Laboratory and one of the National Commission's co-chairs, Tom Mason. The Executive Vice President of the Knowledge Enterprise at Arizona State University, and the new co-chair of the Council's Technology Leadership and Strategy Initiative, Sally Morton. And then finally, we're going to be joined on stage by the Vice President of Research and Innovation at the University of Texas at Dallas, Joseph Pancrazio. So Al, I think once we get our chairs set up, the stage is yours and your panels.
Okay, Chad, thank you very, very much. And to buy some time while we're finishing getting the stage set and our wonderful panelists take their seat, let me launch right away into the overview so that we all can pick up a minute or two. The situation is that the United States finds itself competing with autocratic governments that are investing heavily in technological innovation. And by competing with a government, you're not only competing with the companies and the technology and the people, you're competing with the person who's making the rules. That's a very different beast than what we've competed with before. However, we have the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act. That's a totally new beast. And so I'm going to start with a general question for our panel. We'll just go from the outside end down to the inside and from the inside end down to the next for the next one. And so considering that the innovation process is, or innovation is a process and people. From each of your perspectives, from each of your home organizations, what do you think you need to do to go 10 times faster than you had before? And that's not 10 times people at the same speed, not the same people at 10 times speed. What is the systems approach? And we thank our friend from the UK for making sure we're thinking of that. How do you see this as a systems approach to looking at this new speed of innovation?
Well, certainly, Los Alamos is a national security lab, and we function in an environment where, actually, quite frankly, for the last 40 years, we haven't had to go very fast. Our job was to take care of an existing stockpile that had been built up in the Cold War, and not do anything that might be seen as provocative, which might include developing new and innovative things. And now all of a sudden we find ourselves in a situation where we are being asked to go very fast, and we have built up systems and processes and ways of doing things that work just fine when you weren't doing anything quickly, and actually are not so well adapted to an environment where we're facing rapidly evolving changes. You know, some of it actually is about more people. We're hiring, but that's not going to get us there. And so we're having to go back and look at the way that we do things and why we do it this way. We've learned a lot. We have tremendous tools now that did not exist 40 years ago, and I think that's part of the solution. Okay. I think the other thing to recognize is that you mentioned CHIPS and Science. That was part of actually a suite of legislative accomplishments, some of which were bipartisan, like CHIPS and Science, bipartisan infrastructure law, some of which less so, the Inflation Reduction Act. Collectively, it's been noted that, you know, this package of things is starting to get close to industrial policy, which was something traditionally the U.S. did not do, really. To the extent we had an industrial policy, it was really, we're going to spend a lot of money in innovation and defense, and good things will happen. And the thing that prompted, I think, this shift is some industries, chips being the prime example, got so big that the government could no longer really set the agenda just by investing in R&D and through its purchasing power. The government's irrelevant in the semiconductor business, and that required a different approach. However, I think when you look at future technologies and the things that we want to deploy at speed and scale, where you don't have that currently massive scale that, say, the semiconductor industry have, I do think there's still a role for federal investment in innovation. We can set the agenda in, things that have not yet emerged. And that's something that worked very well for us in the latter half of the last century. And quite frankly, in the current environment, it's one of the things that I think you'll get agreement on in Washington, particularly when it's focused on national security. And we've seen in the past historical examples of really amazing things that happened remarkably quickly when it's got that impetus behind it.
Okay, great. I really appreciate that answer. And so we're going to run down the line, each person, because you'll have a different view. Remember, the future of innovation, developing and deploying, disruptive tech, speed and scale, but we got to move a lot faster than before. What are your thoughts?
Thanks for the question. So when I discuss innovation strategy with my team at Lockheed Martin, I always start with the assertion that innovation is driven by need and enabled by discovery. I find when I start with that, we start from that perspective, that strategy for innovation becomes both self-evident and self-motivating. Innovation driven by need means that you have to have a process for identifying, understanding, and prioritizing capability needs based on their urgency and their impact on national security. And when I say national security, I'm talking about broad national security to include economic security and climate security. Focusing that understanding and creating that understanding includes looking at the broad spectrum and the myriad of very complex and dynamic challenges that are driving those needs. And once you have that understanding, I find that it creates both focus and direction for innovation, but also incentive and motivation to innovate with purpose and with urgency. The second part of that, innovation being enabled by discovery, means that you also have the second half of the strategy development process is that you have to have an ability to really survey and scour a very broad landscape of technologies that could be advanced to provide capability solutions. And that in turn means that you have to create and sustain a very healthy and robust innovation ecosystem, and recognizing that we're not going to win by numbers alone. We have to, in my opinion, leverage two of our most valuable assets. One being that we need to leverage the diversity of talent and creativity of a broader population that we still need to bring into our innovation ecosystem. And the second is our ability to collaborate and form partnerships so that together we can move much faster than we can alone.
Great, thank you. Okay, what are your thoughts? Same topic.
Okay, so at the university, at George Mason University, I think the key to being able to move at speed and scale is really going to be partnerships, because we're not fast and we're not big at the university. And so when we talk about partnerships, how will we partner? Well, I think, when the NSF kind of laid out the TIPS Directorate and specifically the Engines program, they talked about these three areas. So workforce, research, and translation. And so I think we need to partner in each in each one of those areas to move in speed and scale. With regard to research, we need to be working on the right problems. And so partnerships with industry is going to be really, really important for that. And then, you know, if you think about research partnerships, you're working on the right right problems. Typically, if you're working on a research award and you partner, you'll have universities, and then they'll get a bunch of university partners. That's a problem. There's a problem, right? Because, you know, oftentimes we don't really understand the application, and we need to develop things at speed and scale. We need to translate. And so making sure that as we talk about transdisciplinary research, that we're not just talking about working with other academics, but we're talking about working with those outside of the academy, the national labs and industry. And so the right problems, the right partners. If we're talking about workforce, we need to be teaching the right things. And again, that's partnership with industries, partnership with government. I think if we talk about translating technologies, certainly a lot of research and discovery happening at the universities. IP is generated from time to time from that research. And there's a lot of, you know, in our innovation ecosystems at the universities, we get a lot of support from our states, okay? And that's great for economic development, a lot of state investment. The federal investment, of course, is funding the research, and then there's this need in order to understand the state's interests and the federal interests and make sure that there's alignment there. And so we do have state partners and we have federal partners for our translation and really understanding how to leverage those two interests. And in some ways, that's what that Engines program was all about, right? Because there were regional economic development engines, and so you had the state putting in some money, you had the state, you had the federal government putting in some money, you had the state regional investment, and really sorting that out. There's a lot of work to be done, but the first thing to understand is really with that type of partnership, the state and federal, understanding what their interests are and making sure that you are satisfying those in that partnership.
Great, thanks. Another answer, another perspective.
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to say three things, and the first builds on your points, Dr. Marshall. As we think about partners, we speak about academia, where we are, industry and government, national labs, and so on. But I think the fourth partner we need to think about being in the room, and we've already spoken about it this morning, is society. It's one thing to say these technologies work. It's another thing for people to have the ability to employ them. Implementation science has to be here. What is the behavior change? So that's kind of the fourth partner that needs to be in the room. My second point is, as a public university at Arizona State University, obviously we're thinking about educating the regular undergraduates, graduate students. We have the largest engineering school in the US with 30,000 students. But we think very comprehensively about education, K through 12. How do we get young students, already speaking about that this morning, interested in innovation? How do we work with our community colleges, our members of the community? And how do we use technology in that educational journey? At ASU, we're teaching over 3,000 introductory biology students via augmented reality. And their educational outcomes are better than those students taking those classes in the regular lab. How do we utilize that? There was comments made this morning about institutions that don't have the large machines, the MRIs and so on. How can we employ augmented reality to bring that capability to students and others in other settings? And the third point I would like to make, and this is building on the systems comments that were made this morning, I believe we need to have a learning innovation system. There's a concept in healthcare where I've spent most of my career called a learning healthcare system. The idea is that you generate knowledge, collect data, and learn as you're going. We need, as we set up these innovation systems, the NSF engines and so on, to learn from those settings to employ that in the future. And we need to think prospectively now about that data collection and learning so that we don't look back 5 years from now and say, we wish we collected these data and so on. So those would be my 3 points.
Great, thanks. One more thought, one more perspective.
Yes, thank you. So at the University of Texas at Dallas, we actually asked that very same question about 15 years ago, and it led to the formation of an Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which spans the entire university, that brought programs for students, for faculty, to develop and bring their technologies from the bench towards the marketplace. It takes years to develop that culture at a university, but when you do, you start to see payoffs, and those payoffs take the form of a multiplicity of startup companies, of licensing opportunities, for really bringing and diversifying the number of students and those even in the K through 12 area, where you bring programs. We have one called Innovate Her, where they're cohort based. It's led to Blackstone Charitable Foundation support and us providing substantial leadership for the entire state, the entire system in and around innovation and entrepreneurship. The other element, we touched a little bit on this, is partnerships. As the partnerships, sure, state, federal, but we have a strong partnership with the local city. And with it, there's an innovation corridor where we built and have a university presence in those locations, where we have 5 centers that we've established within those zones. They're primarily industry facing. Those things have made a tremendous amount of impact. Probably the thing I struggle with most is how to use state money, because I can't, towards funding new startups. It's illegal. Now I need all sorts of other resources, and I think the NIH has the NIH Reach program, which actually allows us to make investments in startups that come out of the university, okay, and ultimately go forward to the commercial space. But I think that's a start. There need to be other programs.
Great, thank you very, very much. So I'll work my way along the line roughly in the other direction, but let me ask a couple of focused questions, because we've had some discussions to warm up for this. Dr. Pangrazio, sure. You've mentioned the Valley of Death, and which is what every startup needs to cross. Let me offer this broader question and see what you would offer as answers. So, given that either in the autocratic countries in the world, where there's a lot more money being put into research, or here in the United States, or among the liberal democracies, where a lot more money is going to go into research, what do you think we can do to ensure that as a result of that research, more of the new technology that's being developed is developed either here or with our liberal democratic partners?
Well, I feel a little bit like the Indianapolis Colts when they were playing against Tom Brady and the deflate gate, where they took the football, took the air out of it. But in this instance, the New England Patriots had 4 times the number of team members on their side, the squad, and they had all the fans watching all the signals and signaling it. So they're not playing by the same rules. So first and foremost. So how do we create, the Valley of Death and those kinds of resources that are necessary to bridge and bring some of the activities, especially, I'm going to think about it mainly from the university perspective. It's so important to have the resources to be able to invest, and an ecosystem of venture development and partnerships with a local community that allow our faculty, our students, those who will become the entrepreneurs of the future or the current, to be able to engage with that particular ecosystem. You need resources. And we've been fortunate that we've been able to have private resources, Blackstone Charitable Foundation, for example. I think the NIH Reach, I mentioned a moment ago, it's about putting money towards startups that come from the bench towards the marketplace. I think the NSF program, the Accelerating Research Translation, is very well intentioned for developing offices of technology commercialization at universities, especially those that are not fully developed. I think where it falls a little bit short is those who are between. Mm-hmm. There are needs for being able to have resources to be able to get through that valley of death. So, I do think that people will make decisions based on whether or not you have a local zone that invites collisions, by which I mean collisions with investors, collisions with those who are involved in regulation, in federal support, So if you can create those kinds of local zones, and we're doing so through our innovation quarter engagement, I think you have a chance to keep the talent here, to keep it in the region. We've seen success happen as a function of that, and I think I want to be able to continue to build on that.
Great, thank you. So I want to ask a different question now. So for Dr. Browning, I have a question I'd like to ask. So with this surge of research funding from wherever, there may be that the difference between technology that's great for national security and technology that's for the commercial market, those differences may be blurring, and there's going to be a lot of overlap. So what are your thoughts about how we should optimize investments to bring technology forward that can benefit both economic growth to keep our country strong and at the same time bolster national security?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I think first it's important to recognize that while the lines may be blurring, they have not disappeared, right? So in the instances where the technology for national security is very well aligned with the commercial technology, there are some great opportunities. There are opportunities to build new markets. There's opportunities to innovate faster, particularly on the defense side, because we can now leverage the very significant investments that the commercial industry is making in a broad range of technologies. So there really is a win-win in the case where there is really good alignment between defense technology needs and what the commercial world is innovating. There are also opportunities when the technologies are close but not quite, but that also creates some challenges. And I would say quite frequently, needs of the defense industry are well aligned with many of the commercial industries, but there are some unique requirements. These could be, we need to deploy this technology in an area where we don't have ready access to power, or it might be size and weight constrained. It could be a security challenge. And in those instances, I do think there are still opportunities, but it means exploring some new business models and new types of collaboration and relationships between the defense industry and commercial industry to ensure that the needs of the defense industry are met. The defense industry needs to be able to work with commercial industry, not as a customer or just a source of revenue perceived by the commercial industry, but we need to think about how do we work together as co-developers. And the same on the side of the commercial industry. There are benefits potentially to their business strategies in working with the DoD. But again, it's gonna have to require a change in the working relationship, again, to become co-developers. And we are working through that. This is happening, but it does create some challenges just in the relationships. But there's tremendous potential to do, again, benefit on both sides. So
great, thank you very, very much. Okay, so for my next question, I'm going to pose it to both Doctors Marshall and Morton. We'll hear the academic view. Dr. Marshall, if you would go first, based on the alphabet. In the United States, I think we all recognize universities are a key innovation engine, and it's their job to bring into the marketplace a new generation of innovation leaders. Looking at it from the view of, okay, how do you find more people to come for that training, and that's A, and B, what challenges are you facing now in actually fostering a stronger culture of innovation and entrepreneurship so that when the people come, they go through the system faster and are more effective? So what are the challenges you're facing in that area?
Okay, so yes, we need to bring more people into innovation. We have our regional centers of innovation and startup cultures, right? We've got Boston, we've got the Bay Area, right? New York. And I'll mention from the university perspective, a great program that really I participated in. The NSF director, Dr. Panchanathan, actually participated in it. It's the I-Corps program, right? Many of you all have heard about the I-Corps program, but as a former program director, I just like to speak a little bit more about the intent of that program, right? So that program is a program that teaches researchers how to become entrepreneurial, all right? It's a congressionally mandated program that started in 2011. It was based upon Steve Blank's course at Stanford, who taught the Lean Startup methodology. What's really cool about that program is that Steve Blank's course, taught at Stanford in the Bay Area, is now offered around the United States, okay? I-Corps was a way and is a way to democratize the innovation culture that started in the Bay Area. So it's a really powerful program, and it's expanding beyond that now with the TIPS Directorate and the at NSF. It's been adopted by other federal agencies, and it is more structured now in its collaborative structure to have universities participate in regional cohorts. And so now we've got universities working together, 10 or so universities working together to create a culture within their universities, beyond their universities, for innovation, for researchers that are not just the faculty members, but the students as well. And so I'm taking up a lot of time here, but I'll just make one other point, is that's still a narrow population. Even though it's spanning universities, it's spanning the United States, it's focused on researchers, we also have to, along in the spirit of democratizing the startup culture and innovation, we have to do that inclusively so that everyone can see themselves as an entrepreneur, as an innovator. And that comes with agency, okay? So really helping our researchers, our students, have the agency to create and see themselves as creators and innovators. I go on and on. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, because Dr. Morton needs to get a few words in edgewise.
Well, hard to add to those comments. I would say at ASU, we also have an Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute. My colleague, Linda Ricciuti, who directs it, is here today, where we've tried to really incorporate innovation into all of our students' education, as you say, give them the tools and the agency so when they go out in the world, they're able to utilize that. We have venture programs where students can apply and compete for venture capital for various ideas. And so we really try to indoctrinate all our students in that way of thinking. But let me turn now to faculty. We are also part of the NSFI core program as well. But I think the real issue for academics is we are not much prone to risk-taking. So in the promotion and tenure process, as many of you will know, it's very incremental, right? The single paper, you're the individual researcher and make one step forward, you get tenure, great. We need to change that culture. And many places are starting to do that. I would count my institution among that. But how do we allow faculty, how do we incentivize them to be able to take risks, know how to do that, train them on IP and other issues? That's a fundamental change that has to take place at universities. I think it's happening slowly. I don't think it's happening quick enough, to go back to your opening remarks.
Okay, thank you very, very much. All right, Dr. Mason, I want to get back down to you. And there's a question I want to ask around the national labs. So there seems to be a need to balance the desire to move ideas from lab to marketplace, but at the same time, you're dealing with much increased competition, some of it both legal and illegal from foreign entities. So a thorny question. How, what are you thinking about is the way to balance the need to push things out faster and faster, but at the same time protect it against, let's just say, actors who don't act the way we think they should act?
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging problem. You've seen this debate in Congress as, people have been weighing increased investment in science and technology. At the same time, they're asking, how can we be confident that these U.S. taxpayer investments won't ultimately benefit, China, as opposed to the U.S. taxpayers who funded them? It's a completely reasonable question to ask. And I think if we adopt purely defensive measures, I believe we will fail. What do I mean by that? Mm-hmm. If we just say, well, the solution is we want to erect higher and higher walls, then in fact, the byproduct of that is we will have less stuff worth protecting. Because, there is a benefit to being engaged internationally, and trying to get stuff out quickly inevitably means you're trying to disseminate it. And I think if you try and ratchet, if your sole strategy is to try and ratchet that back, you get to a point where you don't have to worry about theft because you've got nothing worth stealing. So I think it's important to remember that first and foremost, we have to make sure that we have things worth protecting, ideas worth protecting. And then we can have a discussion about what are the appropriate steps to protect them. I think there's another dimension to this, which is probably going to be very much in the debate in the next couple of years, and you talked a little bit about this, as technologies get closer to national defense, it starts to get a little bit different. And we have classification, we have means of protecting things that we really don't want shared. But before you get to that point, in general, I would say we have done better with a little bit more in the way of sharing, and then make sure that when the barriers kick in, it's when it's getting closer to national security. I think there's another way to think about this, though, and if you just indulge me, I'd like to tell you about my watch. Most of you probably have one. Okay, this will be quick. Most of you probably have one very much like this. Mine happens to be made by a company called Garmin. They're based in Kansas City. Actually started by an immigrant, Min Kao, and it's got lots of cool technology in it. It has a lithium-ion battery, patented by University of Texas at Austin. Patent sold for $25,000, possibly some regret on the part of the UT Austin enterprise that they let it go so cheap, but it was a long time ago. But the platform technology is GPS, right? This is what allows you to know how fast you're going on your bicycle and when you're going up hills. And this was not enabled by a government program to make smartwatches. That would have been a disaster, I'm pretty sure. It never would have sustained the funding long enough. It would have been totally controversial and, subject to all sorts of partisan bickering. It was enabled, it was a Sputnik moment, it turned out. When Sputnik was flying overhead, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab set up a system to measure its position through 3 ground stations that measured the time differential of the beep, beep, beep. And they could triangulate the position of Sputnik. And a couple of Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab physicists over a beer said, hey, wait a minute. If that means if we had 3 satellites, we could find a position on the Earth's surface by the same timing and triangulation. And that solved a really important problem they had, which was how do you target Soviet Union, this was the Cold War, from subs, where when the subs emerge, you don't know where they are. And that became GPS, and DARPA took it over the finish line. And the only thing that DARPA did that was really, really smart is they decided we'll make it easy for other companies to manufacture receivers. We're not going to encumber that. But you had the power of the federal government driven by national security imperatives to get the darn thing deployed and then get out of the way and let the private sector take over. You know, that is not a bad model. There was a lot of protection around the development of the technology, but in the end, it became open for innovation. And sometimes it's helpful to kind of look back and say what worked.
Okay, so Tom, thank you. You saved the other panelists from my surprise trick question because we're out of time. So I just want to summarize by saying, panelists one and all, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think we've had a great session. And to the audience, I want you to never underestimate the power of having a beer. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone.
Okay, Al, thanks a lot. Sally, Valerie, Tom, Andre. You can, please, you can leave. Off the stage. No, thanks. That was a great conversation. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. You've been sitting here for a couple of hours, but I do mean quick. 10 minutes, please. We have a tight schedule today. Please come back here 11:20. But there's coffee on the side. There's some, I think, drinks and snacks outside. We'll be back here 11:20 for our next panel. Thanks.